We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Ches Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 108a. On the previous Amud, Rava asked if somebody offers up outside of the Beis HaMikdash Rosh ben Yonah, the head of a pigeon. Rashi says Rosh Yonah shel Ola Sa'of. This is of a bird carbon Ola vehelo b'chutz. Again, he offers it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And she'ein bo kezayis, there is not a kezayis. However, umelach mashalimo lechezayis, salt that actually completes it and makes it a kezayis. So mahu, what would be the halach in that situation? Is the person liable or not? And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava min Parzikia Rav Ashi. Rava from Parzikia said to Rav Ashi, Lav hainu pluksayu to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Isn't that the exact same machlokas as we had between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish with regards to the meat, again, that was offered up outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and the bone was mashlimo lekazayis. It made it a kazayis. And the Gemara says it's not necessarily the same machlokas, tiboy Rabbi Yochanan v'tiboy Reish Lakish. This issue of the Rosh ben Yonah, it could be a question according to Rabbi Yochanan, and it can be a question according to Reish Lakish. Tiboy Rabbi Yochanan, it can be a question to Rabbi Yochanan as follows: Adkan lo kama Rabbi Yochanan hasam elo etzem demina debasu. Rabbi Yochanan only said that you can count the bone towards the kazayis by a bone which is again from the same kind as the meat. It is essentially part of the same animal. Avol melach, but when it comes to salt, the lav mina de bar yonahu, that is not a part of the pigeon. So los, I wouldn't say that. And tiboy Reish Lakish, it could be a question according to Reish Lakish as well. Adkan lo kama Reish Lakish hasam ela di parish mina lav mitzvah lasuke. Reish Lakish only said not to count the bone because if the bone would separate from the meat, it would not be a mitzvah to offer it up. Avol hacha, but over here by the salt, the parish, if it separates mitzvah lasuke, it is a mitzvah to offer it up low. Then we wouldn't say that. And then the Gemara says, Odil Maloshno, or maybe we don't make that distinction between the case of the salt and the case of the bone, and the Gemara says Teku. The Gemara leaves it as a question. And Rashi explains, Melach with salt, parish, if it does separate mitzvah lachzor ulamolcho. The point of the Gemara is it's a mitzvah to go again and salt it again. Kedechsiv velo sashbis melach bris, like it says in the pasuk. We learned that from the pasuk of velo sashbis. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that if one is shochet bachutz, let's say he slaughters it outside the Beis HaMikdash and offers it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash, so there, because he slaughtered it outside the Beis HaMikdash, that was already disqualified, and the offering it up is therefore of a disqualified carbon, and therefore there's no liability for offering that up outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rabbanan, they respond to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, how can you make that argument? But that's true anyhow. Even if a person were to slaughter it inside the Beis HaMikdash, ultimately when it leaves the Beis HaMikdash to be offered up outside the Beis HaMikdash, the moment it leaves, it is disqualified. So it's disqualified either way. So why should it be any different when you slaughter it outside the Beis HaMikdash and offer it up outside the Beis HaMikdash? Why should that suddenly take away the liability for offering it up outside the Beis HaMikdash? And the Mishnah never presents a response of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, and so the Gemara says, Heishiv Rebbe, Tachas Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rebbe responded on behalf of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Ma'ale shochit bifnim u'ma'ale bachutz. What's unique about slaughtering it inside and offering it outside, shahai salo shas hakosher, at least there was a moment where it was acceptable. But tomar b'shochet chutz u'ma'ale b'chutz, but it's different in a case where he slaughters it outside and offers it up outside, shalohai salo shas hakosher, it didn't have any moment where it was acceptable. In other words, in a situation when you slaughter it inside, it's true that the moment you take it out, it becomes disqualified, so when it's offered up, you're offering up something that was disqualified, but still there was a moment of hechsher in that situation. But shochet b'chutz is different. There was no shas hakosher, and that's why over there we say there's no liability for offering it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash. That is Rebbe's argument. Heishiv Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon Tachas Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, he offered the following argument on behalf of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Ma'ale shochit b'fnim u'ma'ale b'chutz. What's unique about slaughtering inside and offering it outside, shekein kodesh mekablo, there the kodesh would accept it. What that means to say is that the disqualification happened in the kodesh, and if it would go up on the mizbeach, it would be accepted. Tomer b'shochit b'chutz shein kodesh mekablo, but if he slaughters it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, there the disqualification doesn't happen in the Kodesh, and the Kodesh does not accept it, and so therefore, again, that is a worse kind of disqualification. The Gemara says, "My beinayu," what's the difference between these two approaches on behalf of Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Amar Zeiri says, "Shchitas laila ika beinayu." A difference could be slaughtering it at night. There it is problematic from the outset. There is no shas hakosher in that situation. However, it is also a disqualification that happens again in the Kodesh, not outside of the Kodesh. Rabba says Kabbalah b'klicho lika beinayu. Another difference between them could be, let's say it's accepted in a vessel that is a mundane vessel that's not a klei kodesh. So then in such a situation, again, from the very outset, it is disqualified, but it is a disqualification that happens in the kodesh. And Rashi explains Shas HaKosher, it has a time where it is fit. Likari Bifnim, there was a moment where it could have been offered inside. Shekain Kodesh Mekablo, and then the Gemara said the difference is, some disqualifications the Kodesh can accept it, meaning, Afal Pishe Utzio, even if, let's say, the disqualification was he took it outside of the mikdash, but in chazar v'hichniso, let's say he goes ahead and brings it back inside the mikdash, v'halei, and then offers it up, lo yored, it wouldn't come down from the mizbeach. Kida amron v'hamizbeach mekadesh, like we say earlier in hamizbeach mekadesh in that perek, halon v'hayotze, etc. We talk about again by yotze that this is true. The distinction between the two approaches, shchitas laila ika beinai, one difference could be slaughtering at night. L'Rebbe, according to Rebbe's approach, shachat behema b'laila b'fnim v'hela b'chutz. Let's say he slaughters the animal at night inside the mikdash, then offers it outside. Potter, there he actually will be exempt. Shelo haisa law shas kosher. There was no moment where it's kosher. Divishchitas nifsala, because by the very slaughtering already from the beginning it was possible. But Rebbe Lazar Chayiv, according to Rebbe Lazar Chayiv, sharei hakodesh mekablo. There again, the holy would accept it in such a case. Shem ala lo yered, if it went up on the mizbech, it wouldn't come down. And Rashi continues, Rabba says, Kabbalah b'klichol ika beinayu. The difference is if it's received in a klichol, in a vessel that's chol. And again, Shas HaKosher leka, in that case, there is no moment where it's rendered fit. But Kodesh Mekablo Ika, but it is accepted by the Kodesh. If it goes up on the Mizbech, it doesn't come down. The Chol Shepsula Kodesh, because as we said, anytime the disqualification takes place in the Kodesh, then HaKodesh Mekablo, then the Kodesh will in fact accept it. Again, if it goes up on the Mizbeach, it does not come down. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Tameh Sha'achal Bein Kodesh V'chulu, according to the Tanakama, if an individual is Tameh and he eats Kodesh, it doesn't matter if that Kodesh is Tahar, is pure, or if it is Tameh, it is impure. That makes no difference. In all scenarios, the person is going to be liable to kares. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that's not the case. If the person who is tamei eats kodesh, which is tamei, then there will be no kares. The Rabbanan argue back against Rabbi Yossi Haglili and say that doesn't make any sense. The moment the person who is tamei touches the kodesh, it becomes tamei as well. So every case it becomes tamei, and so therefore the same should be true if it was tamei in the beginning. And the Gemara says, Shapir ka'amri le Rabbanan Rabbi Yossi Haglili. The Rabbanan are making a good argument to Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Of course, that's true every time a person who is tamei eats the kodesh becomes tamei. So why is it that Rabbi Yossi Haglili is saying that if the kodesh was already tamei ahead of time, then suddenly he's exempt? And the Gemara continues and explains, Amar Rava says, Kol heichot de nitma tumas haguf, v'yachar kach nitma basar. Any time where the person first became tamei and then the meat became tamei, tekuli alma lo pligi dechayiv. It's actually true. Everybody agrees that the person is liable there. Shekain tumas haguf bekares, because he has that tumas haguf, and the liability, it comes with the liability of kares. That doesn't go away if subsequently that piece of kodesh that he would later eat becomes tamei. Ki pligi, when do they argue? B'shenitma basar, v'yachar kach nitma haguf. They argue in a situation where the basar, the meat, becomes tamei first, and then the person becomes tamei. That is the machlokas. The Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold amrinon migo. We say migo. We'll see Rashi in a moment in terms of the principle of migo, but the principle of migo essentially says again that there's going to be liability for the tumas haguf in that case. Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds lo amrinon migo. We don't have the principle of migo. The Gemara says Rabbi Yossi, but according to Rabbi Yossi, nihid de migo lo amrinon. Granted that we don't have the principle of migo, but teisei tumas haguf de chamira. But since tumas haguf is stricter, that should come along. V'tachal al tumas basar, and that should take effect on the tumas basar. And so there still should be liability based on the strictness of tumas haguf relative to tumas basar. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Ravashi says, Mimai de tumas haguf chamura. How do you know that tumas haguf is considered stricter? Dilma tumas basar chamura. Maybe tumas basar is considered stricter. Shekain ein la tara b'mikvah, because when it comes to meat becoming tummy, there is no purification process that is possible in the mikvah. And Rashi explains, Kol hecha de nitma gufo shal zevi achar kach nitma habasar. If the person first became tamei and then the basar became tamei, there's no machlokas. V'afilu al yidei acherim, even if others made the basar tamei, but still, mod Rabbi Yossi Haglili dechayiv. Rabbi Yossi Haglili would admit that the person is liable. Kida amran, like we say, mali al yadu, mali al yidei acherim. What difference does it make if he makes a tamei, if others make a tamei? The time of the Rabbi Yossi mishum de'ein isra chal al isra. The real reason of Rabbi Yossi is that one isra can't take effect on the other. V'kan isra tumas haguf kodem, but if the isra of tumas haguf came first, so that's not an issue. But ki pligi b'shenitma basar tchila. The machlokas is when the meat becomes tamei first. V'neser al zeh mishum tumas basar. Now the prohibition is already there because of tumas basar. Shein chayav and alav chatas, and there's no liability of chatas for that that particular prohibition. Now, when the person then has tumas haguf, islay Rabbi Yossi ein iser tumas haguf chalal iser zeh. Rabbi Yossi holds that this prohibition of tumas haguf can't take effect on the iser that's already there. V'afagav the iser kolel, now even though it's what we call an iser kolel, it's a more inclusive prohibition because tumas haguf is going to prohibit him from all kodesh. The ikol lameimar demigo demitzar b'shar chatichos tahoros. One can say, since he's now prohibited in other meats that are pure, mishum tumas haguf, because of the tumas haguf, nitzar nami bahach, we should say is also in this also. Lo amrin and hai migo, we don't say that migo. The migo essentially is working through this concept of iser kolel. Hilkach, therefore, ein raya mitame sha'achal asabasar. There's no proof from the case of a tame person that eats something that's tar lakan. To this case, the hasam tumas haguf kadim, because there, as we said, the tumas haguf came first. V'rabbanan savri amrinan migo. The rabbanan say we do say migo v'isra kolal chalal isra acher. A more inclusive isra will take effect on another prohibition. To had amrinan ein isra chalal isra bisura dial mukamrinan. The rule of one isra cannot take effect on another is just in general, but it wouldn't apply in this case of isra kolal. And then the Gemara said nihidalo amrinan migo. Granted that we don't say migo, but there's another reason we should say lochel isra al isra. Granted that we don't say migo that the isra should be chalal isra. V'afilu kolal, even if it's kolal. Miu, nevertheless, hani mili hecha d'shneim shavin. That's only true when the two prohibitions are equal. Aval hacha teisei tumas haguf dechamira v'teichol bekolal al tumas basar dekela. Here you have a case where tumas haguf is stricter, so through kolal it should actually take effect on the tumas basar, which is kal, which is more lenient. Ta'achi amrinam b'shchitas chulin v'parakid anosha. That's what we say in parakid anosha. Rabbi Yossi Aglili lesle isra chalal isra afilu al yedei kolal. Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not hold that isra is chalal isra through kolal. Uvisra chamor isle isra chalal isra. But if it's a strict prohibition, he does hold of it. Kishu isra kolal, when it's an isra kolal. Gabe ochel gid hanosha shel ola. That was by a case of one who eats the gid hanosha of an ola. To kimna Rabbi Yossi Aglili de katani chayev shtayim. We say that's like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, where it says that he's liable to two in that case. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Chomer b'shchita mi be'aliyah u'va'aliyah mi b'shchita. There's some stringencies by slaughtering outside the Beis HaMikdash from offering up outside the Beis HaMikdash, and there's stringencies for offering up more than slaughtering, and the Mishnah explains. Chomer b'shchita, a stringency that applies by slaughtering outside the Beis HaMikdash, sha'ashochet lehed yor chayiv. If somebody slaughters outside the Beis HaMikdash for a regular person, so then the person is liable. That's considered slaughtering outside the Beis HaMikdash. V'hamala lehed yor pater. But let's say somebody offers it up for a regular individual, he's actually exempt in that case. Rashi explains, Hashochet kachim b'chutz la'achilas hed yor chayiv. Let's say he slaughters kachim outside the mikdash for a regular person to eat it, so he's chayiv in that case. That would be considered again kachim b'chutz. However, v'hamala lehed yor pater, if he offers it up to a regular person, he's pater. And Rashi explains, mishum halo aschutz, he's pater because of offering a korban outside the mikdash. Why? Because v'chayiv mishum over avodas kochavim. In that case, there's a different liability. He's chayiv for serving avodah zara. That's what offering up lehedyot means. Vim hazed ba'avodas kochav. Now let's say he did it on purpose, the avodah zara. V'shagag b'halo aschutz. And let's say he was mistake. It was a lapse of awareness in terms of offering it outside the mikdash. Eino mevi al shegagaso chatas. In that case, he's not going to bring a chatas for his shogeg v'taima mefarish b'gemara. And the reason for this will be explained in the Gemara. And so again, that is the stringency that exists by shchita. And the Mishnah continues, Chomer ba'aliyah, now the stringency by offering up, Shnayim sha'achazu b'sakin, if two of them grab the knife, meaning two people grab a knife, v'shachtu, and they slaughtered outside the mikdash p'turim, they're exempt in that situation. The Gemara will explain. Achazu be'aver, but on the other hand, let's say two people grab a limb, v'helu, and they offer it up, chayovin, then they will be chayiv. Hele, chazar v'hele, v'chazar v'hele. Let's say the person offers up an offering outside the Beis HaMikdash, and again, so he'll be liable, and then he has a new lapse of awareness and does it again, and then a different lapse of awareness does it again. Chayiv al kol aliyah, he's going to be chayiv on every single offering up. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, that's what Rabbi Shimon says. Rashi explains, Hela v'nodalo, he offers it up, then he becomes aware. V'chazar v'hela, then he offers up again. Me'osa behema atzma, from the same animal. Uv'gemar mefarish plugsayu, and the Gemara will explain what the machlokas tanoim is over here. Again, Rabbi Shimon says chayiv on each one. Rabbi Yossi says, Eino chayiv ela achas, he's only chayiv one. And the Mishnah continues, Ve'eno chayiv at shi'ala l'rosh ha-mizbeach. He's only chayiv when he offers it up on the top of the mizbeach. Rashi says, She'yala l'rosh ha-mizbeach, she'yivne mizbeach l'shem kach, meaning he built a mizbeach outside the mikdash for this purpose. Ve'yala, and he offered it up. V'taimah mefarish b'gemara. The Gemara will explain the reason for this. So that's the Tanakama. However, Rabbi Shimon says, Afilo hela al hasela, even if he just offers it up on a al hasela or al evan, on a rock or on a stone, chayiv, he is going to be liable. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna ma'ala lehedyot. What's the difference if somebody offers it up for a regular person, the pater where he's exempt? Tichsiv, because it's written in the pasuk La Hashem. We learned that out from La Hashem. B'shchita nami ksiv La Hashem. By shchita also slaughtering outside the mikdash, it says La Hashem. The same exact exemption should apply by shchita. Let's say he slaughters it for a regular individual. Rashi explains Tichsiv La Hashem. It says La Hashem. V'al Pesach o al moed lo yavienu lasos oso La Hashem. Mechlal deva osa La Hashem hakos medaber. The pasuk implies we're talking specifically when it's done for Hashem, again outside the Beis HaMikdash. And so again, if that's the case by shchita as well, b'shchitas chutz nami ksiv, Rashi says by shchitas chutz it's also written v'al pesach ol moed lo havio lahakriv karban l'Hashem. So what's the difference between mala lehedyot and then shochit lehedyot? What's the difference? And the Gemara says, well, shani hasam, it's different over there. Diyamar kra, because the pasuk says ish ish. It says ish ish, which is an inclusion. Rashi says ish ish lahavi ish sheshachat leish, comes to include if a man slaughters for a man, that is going to be included in terms of liability. But the Gemara says to that, gabe halo namiksiv ish ish, it says the same phrase by offering it up as well. It says over there ish ish. And the Gemara says, well, that inclusion is for something else. Mi boy leila shnayim shehelu be'ever chayav, and that ish ish is if two people offer up the limb that they're liable. But the Gemara says, if so, and we can make the same argument by shchita. Let's say it's an inclusion for two people who grab the knife to do the shchita, that they are chayiv. Well, the Gemara says to that, shani hasam, it's different over there. Diyamar kra hahu, the pasuk says the word hahu, echad v'lo shnayim, only one person, not two people. But the Gemara says, if so, gabe halo nami haksiv hahu, by offering it up also it says hahu. And the Gemara says to that, mi boile, that is necessary for the following. Rashi explains, shani hasam b'shchita, when it comes to slaughtering, lo motzes l'midrash ish ish l'chayev shnayim she'achzu b'saken v'shachtu. There you can't say that it's an inclusion to say that two people who grab the knife and they slaughter that they're liable. To aksiv ahu, because it says ahu v'kasal kadaitach v'nichras ha'ish ahu. We think what it means is v'nichras ha'ish ahu. Again, the Gemara said echad v'lo shnayim, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.